Hello and welcome to Scooby-topia, where I like to open my big mouth and make people angry on the regular. Normally on the channel, I take a look back at specific pieces of media from the Scooby-Doo franchise, such as an episode or 12, maybe a movie, or something like that, and give commentary while examining that and the history. Last time we did a little bit of all of that. We're not quite doing that today exactly though. Sometimes I get an idea and it builds and builds until it won't stop unless I just start diving in. Everywhere I turned, I was having conversations about Scooby-Doo's obsession with the Old Americana aesthetic and how deeply it runs. As much as I avoided thinking about this video knowing the kinds of comments I already get. So here I am, about to have the worst comment section since whenever my Queer Velma video was last trending from something. Although I've already been called soy boy, gayer Ben Shapiro sound alike, pretentious, insert homophobic slur, you name it. So I don't have much to lose anymore. And if someone is this far and already getting prepared to comment one of those, we already know this video isn't going to go over well for them. So we got that frustration out of the way. Just for good measure, let me say, Scooby-Doo is just a children's cartoon. It's not that deep, so you don't have to waste time on that one either. If you're ready now, sit back and let's have a discussion about one of the most important ingredients in the Scooby-Doo pie, and the audiences who enjoy it. In many ways, this feels like an amalgamation of many previous videos that have all led to this natural conclusion, so let's get into it. It's fairly impossible to watch the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You without getting that Americana feel. It's just part of what's engraved into the blueprint of the show. It's part of what makes it feel so homey. It runs so deep that this feeling is even evoked in Ted Nichols' music score, applying classic Americana folk songs such as Oh My Darling Clementine into the melodies. It doesn't make too much sense for that to be woven into a mystery show about some teens and their dog, in comparison to being sung by Huckleberry Hound and becoming his theme. But when you consider the way it's scored and applied, it's the perfect musical supplement to evoke that feel and nostalgic emotion from the audience, as what better way is there to get us to mentally connect with Old Americana than the music of it? The orchestration adds that southern home charm that so much of America especially loves to appreciate. As a related aside, the Halloween season has always been my favorite time of year, reading stories like The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, which even Scooby has referenced more than once. And it's that warm, cozy Americana Halloween season feel that I always feel I'm chasing, that I can always count on Scooby delivering. I think the film Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost in particular really perfects evoking that cozy American autumn feeling. The way the town of Oakhaven looks in the film, the historical cultural references, the warm colors, all combined always put me in the exact mood perfect for that season, even in the winter or spring. Just look at the beautiful autumn oranges that make up this gorgeous color palette. The covered bridges, the houses, they all capture that Sleepy Hollow type of setting that's always so warm and inviting during the season. And the hustle and bustle of tourists isn't unlike what real-life places, such as what's now known as Sleepy Hollow, or Salem, which is in Massachusetts like Oakhaven, experience in that period of the year. More on this film later. Back to the original series specifically, characters everywhere across the classic episodes have names like Jefferson Stillwell, the kind of names that evoke something like an American president or some other historical figure or icon in the same vein. There are so many little subtle aspects underlying that come together to form such a specific goal. Speaking of, if you've seen my Scooby family tree video, which will come up a lot here, so do your homework, you know Scooby's family runs very southern. Maybe a little so much so that some people wonder if cousins like Scooby-Dum might be a little, well, both Do and Dum kissing their other cousin D speaks for itself. People wonder if maybe that goes on often in the family. I had to mention that because someone would ask why I didn't otherwise. More on track, his other cousin Dixie is the epitome of this aesthetic, from her Southern Belle aspect to the showboat she works on, not to mention the episode from the same series where Scooby ends up at the White House. Part of that Americana Southern home charm that Scooby loves so much is something that runs so deep, it continued to be integrated well into the late 90s before it lessened. That is to say,
that's the Yankee spirit, Uncle Nat!
The obsession with Civil War imagery as part of that Americana. If somehow you didn't know, the American Civil War was fought between the northern states whose soldiers wore Union blue, and the southern states whose soldiers wore Confederate gray. A horrible, deadly 4-year war that went from 1861 to 1865. The Yankees were the Union soldiers that fought for the North in the Civil War. Yankee being what the Confederate soldiers of the South would call their northern enemies. The word Yankee was heavily popularized by the song Yankee Doodle, originally written by the British as a diss track talk about Americans, to basically say we are gay, oafish, and dumb. No, really, that's what it meant. You can look into it in detail later if that's new to you. Eventually, Americans basically reclaimed it the way the queer community has reclaimed the word queer so heavily until the song and term had a positive connotation, somehow, and became the first national anthem. If you know your history, obviously the Confederates lost to the Yankees and thus had a more negative connotation ever since, and for good reason. The Confederates were the bad guys. Fred telling Uncle Nat that's the Yankee spirit in this scene, which we saw previously in the Globetrotters video, goes along with that. Being the Yankee is the good guy against the ghosts, who are the bad guys, the Confederates, you might say. And it's interesting that they're supposed to be the bad guys because the franchise sure seems to flip-flop and appreciate that other side as well the longer it goes. To start things soft, in the Where Are You episode, A Night of Fright is No Delight, we're introduced to Beauregard Sanders, a Southern colonel and collector of Civil War memorabilia who leaves his fortune to Scooby-Doo for saving him once.
Scooby-Doo had rescued old Beauregard from a fish pond several years before.
All of it turning out in the end to be useless as it's worthless Confederate money.
Huh? Oh no! Wouldn't you know it? All in Confederate money.
As a child, I actually had no idea what that meant, or why the money was worthless, and just had to go along with it. Scooby-Doo just assumes as a general series that kids will know the intricacies of the Civil War context without aid. There's a ton of Confederate memorabilia from the war the gang find throughout the episode as well, including the unfortunate flag. Interestingly, this would be the episode resurrected in the Supernatural episode Scooby-Natural in 2018.
We just found out that Scooby's been named as one of the heirs to a fortune, left to him by an old Southern colonel.
Scooby saved him from drowning. In a fish pond.
But he's dead now, right?
Yeah, cancer.
Even the Confederate money would be included, a sign of how iconic the episode has become.
But the joke is on him because the money's worthless. It's all Confederate dollars.
The episode was also remade in 2015, before that in Season 1, Episode 13 of Be Cool Scooby-Doo, titled Where There's a Will, There's a Wraith, although the Confederate money aspect would now be dropped.
It's hard to imagine our very own Scooby-Doo, a brave hero, actually named in someone's will for saving their life.
From little things like that, let's skip to some bigger fish to get to the point. In the episode Scooby's Roots, as covered in my family tree video, we're introduced to the ghost of great-grandpa Scooby, who is described as a Civil War hero. However, the uniform he's wearing is the Confederate uniform, so we are to assume Scooby has a Confederate relative, and he's not alone.
Wow! Imagine inheriting a whole southern plantation.
In Scooby-Doo Meets the Boo Brothers, the entire plot revolves around Shaggy inheriting the mansion of his Uncle Beauregard he never met. What's strange about that? Uncle Beauregard wears a Confederate uniform, meaning both Scooby and Shaggy have Confederate family members. Not to mention he has a plantation, and that's specifically what he leaves to Shaggy. Shaggy becomes a plantation owner, at least for a moment before he gives it up. It's assumed that Uncle Beauregard is a historical reference to PGT Beauregard, a Louisiana-born American military officer and the first prominent general of the Confederate Army during the American Civil War. So yeah, if there was doubt. Tumblr user Blackthroat made an amazing and life-changing PowerPoint I've linked to in the YouTube description that we're going to take a look at here. It's titled Shaggy Rogers, The Truth Behind the Mask. We are going to have fun here, so please don't think this is serious. I'm including it as a partial joke because I'm obsessed. Too many people take me at face value. The first slides cover what we've discussed already, adding that clearly Beauregard was a master on a plantation, the one he left to Shaggy, implying that he must have also been a slave owner. We note that the film came out in 1987, and the war as we discussed ended in 1865. To become eligible to be a colonel, you have to have served 20 years in the armed forces. Presuming Beauregard joined at the legal age of 18 and was promoted to colonel by December of 1860, he would likely be in his early 40s by the end of the war. Given that, and assuming the movie takes place in 1987, he would have been almost 170 or so at the time of his death. Maybe Scooby's universe is perpetually in the 60s, so the earliest year is 1969 when the show started, though note that the last veteran of the war died in 1956. If the colonel died in 1969, when you do the math, he's still nearly 150 years old at the time of death. The oldest living person was 122 for comparison. How could the colonel have sustained such unnatural life? Clearly, a curse has been laid upon he and his family for his crimes. In further crimes of the family, which I discussed in the family tree video and has another Yankee Doodle reference, Shaggy's ancestor McBaggy Rogers came to America on the Mayflower in 1620. Thus, the Rogers were among the first colonizers in America, in addition to becoming slave owners, nay, plantation plantation masters. They've also been in possession of the Doo family for at least 400 or so years. The PowerPoint kind of goes off the rails here in regards to relevance, so you can go read the rest for yourself if you want. But to get to the end, perhaps Shaggy's cowardice is a physical manifestation of his desire to escape his guilt, the monsters he fears being a reflection of his family's behavior. Although, I'll say he does give the fortune at the end of the movie to orphans, so he's actively trying to better the community at least. Again, this was just for fun, we are being silly for that part. Don't take me at face value when going over that, please. Anyway, the franchise has clearly by now become sympathetic to the Confederacy by the late 80s compared to the 1972 episode where Fred was pro-Yankee, and this would continue into the late 90s. In 1998's Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, the film yet again takes place around a southern pepper plantation, not unlike Boo Brothers. The villains of the film originally came over with other settlers and made the island their home, which, yeah, outside of no indigenous people being seen or referenced, which, thank goodness for once, we're full force evoking the Americana imagery here that you'll see in any Thanksgiving-centric type of story basically. The island continued to be infested by more people over time, including spice traders who started the pepper plantation and constructed the mansion straight out of Gone with the Wind. At one point, the gang meet one ghost in particular, Colonel Jackson T. Pettigrew, another Confederate soldier. Zombies in the film can also be seen in Confederate clothing. While the Colonel and zombies seem like a danger at first glance, the Colonel, along with cohorts, turns out to be an ally who is made out to be an unfortunate victim of the villains of the film who killed him.
Thank you.
So now, in 1998, we have a full-on sympathetic Confederate soldier or two, and in the most universally loved film of the franchise. It's certainly an interesting evolution for the portrayal of this war and this type of person throughout the decades in the series, especially having lasted with it as recent as 1998 at all. But that's the one thing that stayed the same through to here, that Americana imagery, the iconography of an antebellum mansion on a plantation in the South, or the Civil War being evoked without much context to tie back to a different time. The exact kind of thing you might see in any random original series episode of Where Are You? And when it comes to the art of Old Americana as it's been romanticized by time, you really can't get any more American than that, warts and all. Note that I am not dragging nor condemning Zombie Island for this. I love that film as much as the rest of us, and the mansion is still very iconic, as is the whole picture. Back to Witch's Ghost, which has that same disclaimer to keep in mind, please. The film, as I said before, just perfectly captures that warm Americana in the way that's most inviting, but the Massachusetts town of Oak Haven is also recreating a Puritan village as it was founded in the 1600s, after the settlers in this case left England seeking a different, and in their minds, superior religious practice. While Zombie Island conveniently scooted around references to indigenous people, evoking Puritans doesn't make that so easy, as they very much did clash as a main talking point more than ever. You see, Puritans believed natives to be inferior, but also sought opportunity to convert them to Christianity after they set their reformed religion as a big goal. And of course, things didn't go too well between them in the end. However, the film once more doesn't touch on this despite the throwback village and costumes to the period, instead only really focusing on ties to the witch trials of Massachusetts during this period. Calling back to and celebrating this particular time in such a way as the town does in the film is of course worthy of conversation in general, especially depending on any history that might be rewritten for any reason. Ben Ravencroft in the film becomes upset at this happening to his own ancestor, Sarah Ravencroft, who, as he initially explains it, was simply an eccentric medicine woman who practiced healing as a Wiccan and was unjustly persecuted for being a witch. The witch trials are of course another perfect example of classic Americana, for which Scooby-Doo has evoked in episodes before, but the movie ends up changing being Wiccan to more of a race, whereas it would have really been Sarah's religion as opposed to being a Christian like those around her, which would be a likely reason for persecution. Regardless, Ben rightfully gets upset at how the town is now taking advantage of rewriting the history of his ancestor, even using her name for profit all over throughout the celebration. As it goes, accepting that their ancestors wrongfully killed someone isn't as easy as pushing the idea that their ancestors were right and cashing in, which isn't at all unlike the type of revisionism of history for profit or feeling better about it that we see in real life. Of course, Sarah did turn out to be a bad person in the story, but that's the only part of the film that doesn't hold true to that experience. Speaking of, before a certain demographic gets upset if still watching somehow, because this will happen going by my family tree video, after all of that, it should hopefully be clear that I'm not saying Americana and Scooby-Doo is bad either. It does add a large part of the charm to the series, from the comfortable settings like malt shops to the many pop culture and historical references like some of the ones we've discussed. It makes even me feel so perfectly at home. I'd never have the original series any other way, though it is interesting to compare to all the most recent Scooby shows, from What's New to Mystery Incorporated to Be Cool or Guess Who, and see just how much it's changed since beginning to leave that style of Americana behind these days without really changing it all, such as that Be Cool episode remaking the most notable episode to have specific Confederate imagery. 1998 saw sympathy toward the Confederacy, while 2015 saw complete removal of it. That kind of highlights that it is a little weird to see so many references to Civil War imagery, which you don't see at all in cartoons anymore to the degree Scooby presented it, if any. Though to be fair, it's been 5 decades with culture having changed quite a bit. Even so, when I was watching this show growing up, as I've said, I had literally no idea what any of it was a reference to and was kind of confused often, for which I can only imagine how fans in other countries who didn't grow up with American culture outside of media must have felt if even I was lost. So I can't say that aspect aged that well at the end of the day, especially whenever the references do start putting Confederate relations into these characters, or become more positively leaning toward the Confederacy. And this is exactly what made that demographic mad at me in the Family Tree video and got me called soy boy, but the racial representation in the old show also frequently doesn't hold up very well a lot of the time. While making references to indigenous people by the time Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost came around had just stopped, even when it would have made some sense there, I specifically made a reference to how often the characters in the old shows would impersonate Native Americans, and made a joke about Scrappy being racist for it at one point. And it was in fact a silly, goofy joke that I clearly was not serious about at all in that video. But a handful of non-indigenous commenters got incredibly upset, saying indigenous people actually love these jokes and think it's hilarious, so I should stop being so sensitive, which I am sensitive, but it seems one of us can't take a joke, and it wasn't me. It's also very goofy for complete strangers to police what they believe I can or can't joke about when it comes to comedic Scooby representation as if they know me. It's not like I was horribly offended and asking for him to be cancelled at any point in that video. I'm only ever just jokingly pointing out how much times have changed in over 50 years. It's not really a laugh-out-loud funny gag to throw on a Mataoka, aka Pocahontas, costume, which even Disney got flagged for with the Proud Family Louder and Prouder's second season this February from the Native community, though that show got equal flack from the angry anti-woke conservatives on Twitter, who review bombed it over other actually positive representation. It's just kind of absurd how many times the indigenous community is used as a gag in Scooby-Doo well into the 80s for the series. Like, we're beating a dead horse by that point. Find another joke, dog. Though I guess they did, considering they then turned to just ignoring the community's existence altogether. As the series has moved further into the modern day, such as Velma canonically being queer in Mystery Incorporated, which I have a whole video about, or again recently in the film Trick or Treat, which I also have a video about, it's not surprising that there's so much pushback against it when you consider there's a lot of the fanbase made up of this kind of viewer, and or conservative Christian fundamentalists who can't stand to see representation for anyone other than them in media, nor any curse words or violence or sex. I would know by the amount of homophobic comments I get constantly on the Queer Velma video. And with all the talk about the religion in this video, this isn't me digging at all Christians as a whole. My aunt, who I'm incredibly close to and spend time with every week, is a very devoted Christian. I've gotten to know some amazing people who identify as such the last year, and there's nothing wrong with being one in theory nor any other religion. So let's not try that conversation. I've already had many Twitter Christians recently attacking me who think I feel that way based on nothing. Back to the actual point, many purists get incredibly upset at the idea of the franchise being aimed strictly at adults. The point of holding a poll on a fan site last year that ended with the majority voting no to the potential of Scooby being made for them. With no disrespect, it will always boggle my mind that there are childless Scooby adults that are so upset the mere idea that the franchise could be aimed at them in addition to families or kids, that the franchise has to exclusively remain wholesome. The majority of my viewership on this very channel ranges from 18 to 44 as the most active demographic, so I know adults like the franchise. Yet even Scooby Natural still has a ton of pushback from these fans because the gang actually get hurt. There's that violence and cursing and blood and death that keep it from being perfectly wholesome.
Jinkies! Jeepers!
Zoinks! Ruh-roh!
Son of a bitch. I think this cartoon is haunted.
If there are ghosts, that means there's an afterlife! Heaven! Hell! Am I going to hell?
I know the 2023 series Velma is highly controversial, to the point that I have to delete most comments about it on my videos as people get way too nasty when it's discussed to a toxic and obsessive degree. Yes, I'm talking about you. I myself didn't hate it though, while people told me to delete my channel and that I wasn't a real Scooby fan if I didn't condemn it completely like everyone else. But regardless of the actual show content, it speaks volumes that I saw a certain type of people show up every mention of it to comment something like, "Why is Velma black now? She's ugly," about just the designs alone, not the show content, which is what we should be mad about if we're going to be. And that was before we even knew she and Daphne were both yet again canonically queer in it, which I imagine they wouldn't be very happy with either if they actually watched it. And that's the problem with that word from earlier, woke now. As the saying goes, this is too woke, or what they actually mean, this is too gay, this is too black, this is too positive toward Native people. Velma is too Indian, and I don't like that she's not white here. Velma, the 2023 series, is not woke. The problems with that show are not at all that it's woke and made Velma not white. As I spoke about in my video on the first 2 episodes, they literally make jokes you typically find conservatives make, including a lock her up joke. A joke, though I hesitate to call it that, which feels very Kaling, is when Velma says she spits truth without a filter like comedians before, #MeToo. It just falls flat. Dead. Hate it. The lock her up joke is lame. I know Kaling was chuckling to herself over that one. It's not on that side at all, and it goes to show that people with that argument don't actually know what they're talking about. Velma not being white or someone telling you the show is woke online is the least of things to deal with there. Look at this comment about the live-action Little Mermaid film for further example, where someone sarcastically but genuinely says, "I'm sure children really need a black Little Mermaid or gay/trans character in their children's show." That's the mindset this type of person has. Children should not be allowed to be exposed to characters that are black or gay, etc., because it will corrupt them somehow, and Scooby-Doo having that now will ruin children. Check the Amazon DVD reviews of the movie Trick or Treat, and you will find a lot of that exactly in the 1-star reviews from angry conservative parents, most of which didn't even watch the movie and just heard someone else post that it's woke on Facebook. Velma in particular has had a massive misinformation campaign in the Scooby and animation world on Twitter especially, saying it's the direct reason the other Scooby shows and movies were killed recently and it was shown favoritism. Every day you'll see someone comment, "They canceled this but renewed Velma? Ugh." That's just not how the industry works. The show was not shown favoritism. If anything, it was sabotaged by the intentionally bad marketing and using backlash as promotion. Saying it was renewed while the others were canceled or written off isn't even accurate, because we already knew it was ordered for 21 episodes from the start. The same way Voltron on Netflix is listed as 8 seasons but is really only 3. Velma was always going to be 21 episodes, and the so-called second season is probably already done if not close, because it's actually just the back half of the first season. So it's simply an inaccurate and unhelpful narrative to push otherwise. Haunted High Rise or Mystery Pups did not get cancelled for Velma, and are entirely unrelated, but that doesn't matter when pushing agendas. Likewise, the movie recently got leaked, and I can't show footage for example since they already gave me a strike for just acknowledging the movie existed, but it's in the same style as the movies like Happy Halloween or 13th Ghost. Several people in the Scooby fandom that hated that Trick or Treat last year was using the Guess Who animation style or made Velma gay wasted no time in saying this was done in response to that backlash and they were reverting back to that style. That's simply misinformation as well, because the movie is one we've already known was in production and was finished with an original release date meant to be before Trick or Treat, which was produced and changed style after. But that doesn't fit that agenda either. When you consider how much pure and wholesome Americana is baked into the pie that is Scooby-Doo Where Are You? How often the series makes an outdated racial joke or as recent as 1998 portrayed a Confederate soldier positively, it's actually no real surprise that that audience is out there among its massive worldwide fanbase, now making controversy out of everything. Wholesome purists want to keep Scooby-Doo the way it was, to keep to when the Confederacy might not be so bad, when anyone who wasn't white was probably a poor taste joke, when queer people didn't exist out in the open, and the most dangerous thing to worry about was a harmless man in a mask that isn't really going to hurt you like you heard about earlier in that true crime show you just watched. That last part kind of went into fandom discourse discussion instead of exclusively franchise examination, huh? But it's an important part of this greater discussion about where the franchise is these days, which this conversation leads to every time. How many people are going to comment, "Don't make Scooby-Doo political" at some point? And if they do, they should consider why they felt anything here needed to be called that in 2023. Happily embracing the cozy Southern Americana and what makes it work so well in Scooby, while also having discussions about old representation or black or gay characters, nay, people just existing, is not political. We can have this conversation together while having fun and not resorting to saying, well, you're sensitive and woke, so anything you say is wrong and irrelevant. And anyone that actually thinks that way isn't someone worthy of participating in any discussion to begin with if they have nothing to offer. There are a lot of people who can discuss this on deeper levels than I'm capable of, but I can't stop having this conversation with people lately, and it seems I haven't been alone when I bring it up, so I can at least add to those fun conversations or start them for other people. I'm still going to watch classic Scooby episodes constantly, and I'm still going to love that cozy Americana and how warm and wholesome it is, the way it makes me feel right at home in childhood again when I watch an old Where Are You episode or Witch's Ghost. Nothing can ever change that, or should. How do you feel about that aspect of the series? Have you ever noticed just how interwoven that Americana used to be, especially in comparison to the franchise now? And whether you did or didn't, how does that subtle feeling add to the series for you? Especially if you aren't American, as I have friends who definitely have complicated feelings about it having no cultural connection. What other fun little aspects that fall into that but weren't mentioned here have you picked up on before? While we're on the subject, we really might as well take that deep dive in the comments. For a more normal video on the channel, if you missed it, check out the last one covering when Scooby-Doo met Batman, and subscribe if you haven't so you don't miss all the others planned for this year. Like the video if you like, Scooby snacks or whatever. Find me on social media like Twitter, Tumblr, or TikTok if you want, unless you're looking to be hateful because of this video. I'll see you next time in Scooby-topia. Bye!